One of the odd details of the story of the Egyptian enslavement is the fact that Shevet Levi was not enslaved. Rashi brings this on a pasuk near the end of the parsha. When Moshe and Aaron come to Paro the first time and propose that the Jews be let out to bring korbanos, 3-day trip into the Midbar. So Paro answers, Lama Moshe v'Aaron tafriyu asami masav. Moshe and Aaron, why do you disturb the people? Why do you distract them from their jobs? L'chula siblosechem. Go to your own jobs. Go back to work. So Rashi says, L'chula siblosechem, l'chula melachtechem sheish lechem lasos b'batechem. Siblosechem means go back to your personal business. Aber moleches shibud mitzrayim l'hois al shivta shel Levy. But they didn't have to participate in the enslavement of the Egyptians. And Rashi says, I'll prove it to you. Because you see that Moshe and Aaron seem to be free to come and go as they please. Obviously, if they were enslaved, they wouldn't have that liberty. So you see that the tradition of Chazal is correct. The Shevet Levi was not nishtabed. The Ramban brings the Rashi, and the Ramban says that Rashi is correct. There was a medrash which says it's medrash Rabbah, and the Ramban offers a conjecture as to why this was the case. Why was it that Shevet Levi was not enslaved? And the Ramban says something very peculiar. He says because every nation was given the right to have its spiritual leaders, its morim, its teachers, and the Jewish nation was no exception. So even though Paro enslaved them, he would not deprive them of the right to have religious instruction. And that's why Shevet Levi was not enslaved, which seems fairly odd. And the Ramban seems to take this as self-evident, that it should be so. It seems very strange. Paro was already enslaving them. Why would Paro want to provide for them spiritual guidance, enlightenment? Seems that that's not one of the priorities a taskmaster would have in providing for his slaves. Let's put that in the back burner. Lulei divrei Ramban, if not for the Ramban, I would have said a different reason why Shevet Levi wasn't enslaved. And it really is based on a medrash Rabbah which discusses the entire idea of the enslavement. Why were the Jews enslaved? What happened? And it seems there was a regime change that until a certain point the Jews were beloved and respected. Then all of a sudden, Vayakom melech chadash on Mitzrayim, a new king rises. Asher lo yadas Yosef, he doesn't know Yosef. Rashi says either he really was a new king or it was just that Nischachu Gzeireisav, he had a new policy. But what really happened? So there's a very famous medrash Rabbah which says the following. Rabbanan paschim pischa lahaikra. The Rabbanan introduced their discussion of PARSHA Shemos with this pasuk. This pasuk in Hosea really is referring to later events in Jewish history. It is B'Hashem Bogadu. They defied God. Kivanim Zorim Yolodu, because they gave birth to foreign children. Now this is a reference to the fact that Jews intermarried. They married Gentile women. And as a consequence, they had Bonim Zorim, children that weren't Jewish. And this is a terrible sin. So Ata, now, as a consequence, Yoichlem Chodesh Es Chalkehem. The month will consume their portions. And the Meforshim will say this is a reference to Chodesh Av. Av is the month of Churban, so that month will bring about their consumption. So this is the simple pshat in the pasuk. But the Medrash takes this pasuk and applies it to Mitzrayim. It says as follows: Lamedcha. This teaches us that Keshemes Yosef Hefeiru Bris Milah. That when Yosef died, the Jews began to violate the mitzvah of Bris Milah. That's B'Hashem Bogodu. They defied God. Or they said, Niyeh Kemitzvim. Let us be like the Egyptians. So they were Mevatel Bris Milah in Mitzrayim. Even though the pasuk says in Yoshua, Kimulim hayu kol ha'yotzim Mitzrayim, says beferish that all the Jews who left Egypt were circumcised. But the Medrash explains that was just before the Yetzias Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu circumcised them all, because there was a halacha to eat Korban Pesach. You had to be circumcised. Kol aro lo yochal bai. So they were meant to bring Korban Pesach the night before the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So for that, they all had to be circumcised. But over the decades and decades and decades of enslavement, from the time of Yosef, the Jews, in fact, were mevatel bris milah. V'chivur she'asu came, and when the Jews were mevatel bris milah, hafach HaKadosh Baruch Hu ha'ahava shehoyu ha'mitzriyim ayhavim oisam l'sina. The love that the Egyptians had for the Bnei Israel, and they had a love, because after all, the Jews were the saviors of Mitzrayim. Yosef saved the entire country. HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned the love into hatred. Shenemar, it says in the Pasuk, Pasuk in Tilim, Hafach libam lisnai amai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned their hearts over to hate his nation, lihisnakel ba'avodov, that they should plot against his servants, against Hashem's servants. So Hashem turned the love of the Egyptians into hatred, and accordingly the Egyptians plotted against Hashem's servants. Lekayim Hashinemar, and this fulfills the pasuk, Ata yochleim chodesh es chalkeihem, that the month will consume their portions, and the Gemara says that the word chodesh, ches dalad shin, could also be read as chodosh, and being a reference to the Melech Chadash, Sha'amad v'chidesh aleim zeirais. So that pasuk, don't read it Ata Yochlem Chodesh es Chalkeim, but rather Ata Yochlem Chodosh es Chalkeim, that the new Melech, whose Gzeres were Nischadesh, he will consume them, because Bashem Bogodu, that they were Mvatel Bris Milah. So it says here that the cause of the entire enslavement was when the Jews began to neglect Bris Milah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned the love into hatred. Just as an aside, the Beis Levi in this week's Parsha, and the Netziv as well, in a special kuntras, the Netziv wrote a special kuntras on the subject of anti-Semitism called Shar Yisrael, write that this is really the underlying cause for anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a correction that HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduces when Jews are at the verge of assimilation. When Jews are tempted to assimilate, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns the love of the Ummahs into hatred in order to prevent us from becoming lost. So here, as long as the Jews were distinct, they were Mekayim Bris Milah, so there was no problem. The Egyptians could love them, and rightfully so. They deserve to be loved. But when the Jews said, Niyah Mitzrayim, let's be like the Egyptians, just like they're not circumcised, we also should Mavatel Bris Milah. So then there was a danger of assimilation. So to prevent that from happening, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to turn the love into hatred. Just as an aside, I'll just mention that this really is the explanation of a very, very strange thing we find in the Torah. The Torah says, Lo sesaiv Mitzri, you should not scorn an Egyptian, Ki ger ha'isa ba'artzo, because you were strangers in his land, and therefore Dor Shlishi, the third generation, the grandchildren of converts, can enter the Kal Hashem. But it says that you have to have a certain affection for the Egyptians because you were a ger ba'artzo, you were a stranger in his land. So Rashi says that when we were desperate, there was a famine in Eretz Canaan, so Mitzrayim was an achsanya b'shas ha'tchak, it hosted us in our time of need, and therefore we have to have a measure of gratitude. So the question is, okay, earlier in history they did that, but later on they enslaved us, they tortured us, they drowned the Jewish babies, it was a virtual genocide, and nevertheless we have to have a debt of a karas v'tari. We have to have a debt of gratitude to them. It's incredible. No, the answer is very simple. The answer is because the natural midah, the natural inclination of the Egyptians was to love the Jews. The fact that they turned against them and enslaved them and tormented them and killed them, that was hafach libam lisnai lama. That's the HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned their hearts, their love into hatred. That they're not responsible for. That was HaKadosh Baruch Hu interfered with their natural inclination. The Egyptians loved the Jews and were devoted to the Jews. Since there was a risk of assimilation, so and the Jews understood that this was an aberration. This was not the natural way of the Egyptians, because you see in later Jewish history, whenever the Jews are threatened, where do they turn to for help? When they're going to be attacked by Assyria or by Babylonia, where do they turn to? They turn to Mitzrayim. They turn to Egypt for support. To Egypt for support? I mean, are their memories so short? This is the nation that enslaved them and tried to kill them. And yet, when they're threatened, they turn to Mitzrayim. The answer is because they understood this clearly. That it was temporary insanity that the Egyptians should want to enslave the Jews. So it was really Gzeira Shamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned their hearts over. Precisely because they were Mevatel Bris Milah. What about Shevet Levi? Was Shevet Levi Mevatel Bris Milah? There's a very interesting pasuk, and the Machlokes Rishonim how to learn Pshat in the pasuk. It says in Parshas V'zos HaBracha, in the Bracha of Shevet Levi, it says Ubrischa Yinsoru. The Shevet Levi guarded Bris. And Chazal say that's a reference to Bris Milah. Now, what does this refer to? So we have Machlokes Rishonim on this. Rashi learns as follows. There's a Gemara, well-known Gemara in Yevamos, 9 Aleph, which says that in the 40 years that the Jews were in the Midbar, they didn't practice Bris Milah. That's what the pasuk says in Yeshua. The pasuk says that all the Jews who left Mitzrayim were circumcised, but the 40 years in the Midbar, they didn't practice Bris Milah. That's why Yeshua was commanded, after they came into Eretz Yisrael, to circumcise everyone, because the old generation had died out, and all those who were born in the Midbar were not circumcised. So, this is what the Gemara says. The 40 years in the Midbar, they didn't practice Bris Milah. Why was that? So the Gemara says, because the Ruach Tzefainis didn't blow. There's a very gentle wind. The Ruach Tzefainis comes from the north. It's a calm wind. It's a healthful wind. When that wind doesn't blow, so surgery is dangerous. So the Gemara says the 40 years in the Midbar, the Ruach Tzefainis didn't blow. So why didn't it blow? There are several reasons. One reason the Gemara says it shouldn't scatter the Nanei Kavod. Another reason the Gemara says is because they were Nezufim, because of the Chetz HaEgel, they were not on good terms with Rebbeinu Shalom, but whatever the reason was, the Ruach Tzefainis didn't blow, they didn't practice Bris Milah. It was dangerous. It was a sakana. Rashi learns in Parshas V'zos HaBracha that in the Midbar, Shevet Levi practiced Bris Milah. That's our Brischa Yinsoru. It refers to the 40 years in the Midbar. The 40 years in the Midbar that the Jews did not practice Bris Milah because it was dangerous, Shevet Levi did. And there's a question. I mean, if it was a sakana, if you weren't allowed to practice Bris Milah, what is the idea that Shevet Levi practiced Bris Milah? The Malbim talks about it in Yeshua. And the Malbim says that Shevet Levi practiced this mitzvah with Mesiras Nefesh. Now, I'll tell you an amazing thing. Just, you'll find this very, very interesting. After the Chet HaEgel, it says in Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mila Hashem Elai, who is unto the Lord, come and gather. And it says that the Bnei Levi came. So the Netziv asks the obvious question, that the number of people who worshiped the Egel was a very, very small percentage of Klal Yisrael. So why was it only the Levim who came? Members of every Shevet should have come. It was a very small number of people that worshipped the Egel. So the Netziv says an amazing thing. The Netziv says, because this was a very dangerous mission, Moshe was calling them to kill the Egel worshippers. And so when it's a sakana, you attack these people. They can defend themselves. They may have family members who will defend them. So this is a dangerous mission. So who would volunteer for such a dangerous mission? It says only people that are 100% devoted to the Rebbeinu Shalom, who have no self-interest, they have no concerns for their own welfare. Those are the people who volunteer for that mission. That was only Shevet Levi. So there were many people who didn't worship the Egel. But the volunteer to kill the Egel worshippers, that they weren't ready to do. That was a dangerous proposition. But Shevet Levi, that was Mila Shem Eli. They were ach v'rak, 100% devoted to the Ratzon of the Rebbeinu Shloim. Therefore they did it. Now if you look in the Pasuk in V'zayis HaBracha, where Moshe Rabbeinu is praising Shevet Levi, there are two things he mentions in the Pasuk. He mentions Ha'aymer La'aviv U'li'ima Lo Re'isiv V'se'achav Lo Hikir V'zbanav Lo Yada. The Shevet Levi didn't recognize their parents, and not their siblings, and not their children. So Rashi says, what is that a reference to? It doesn't mean literally their parents, or brothers or children, because their fathers also would have been Leviim, and their brothers would have been Leviim, and their children would have been Leviim. It means their mother's father, who might not have been a Levi, or a brother with whom they share a common mother, but perhaps the fathers were of different Shvatim. And children doesn't mean a child, it means a grandchild, a daughter's son, the daughter marrying someone from another Shevet, meaning that when Leviim killed the Egel worshippers, they not only killed strangers, they even killed fairly close relatives. And Uvrischi and Saru, and they also practiced bris milah. So you wonder, what is the juxtaposition of these two things? But according to the Mahalach Rashi, it's very good. Because as the Netziv says, this act of killing the Egel worshippers was an act of self-endangerment. It was a sakana. Their practice of bris milah in the Midbar also was an act of sakana. So both point to this single trait, that they served HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Mesiras Nefesh, even placing their lives on the line, and that's why they're deserving of praise, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu juxtaposes these two schuyas, the killing of the Egel worshippers and the practice of bris milah in the Midbar. That's the sheet of Rashi. The Rambam in Hilchas Yisur Bia, Parak Yud Gimel, has a different pshat in Ubrischi and Saru. He says it's not a reference to the 40 years in the Midbar, it's a reference to the years of Mitzrayim. That when Chazal say that, the Medrash just quoted, that the Bnei Yisrael were Mavatal Bris Milah and Mitzrayim, that was only the other Shvatim. But Shevet Levi practiced bris milah even in Mitzrayim. So again, so Rashi learns it's a reference to the 40 years in the Midbar. That all the Shvatim were Mavatal bris milah because it was a sakana, it was dangerous, the Rosh didn't blow, and Shevet Levi practiced bris milah with Mesiras Nefesh. That's Rashi's pshat. The Rambam's pshat is it's a reference back to Mitzrayim. That in Mitzrayim, when the Bnei Yisrael were Mavatal bris milah, because they said, Nia ke Mitzrayim, let's be like the Egyptians, that was only the other Shvatim. Shevet Levi in Mitzrayim practiced bris milah. It could be that according to the sheet of the Rambam, in the Midbar, where it was a sakana, maybe Shevet Levi didn't practice bris milah. The way the Rambam learns. The Rambam learns that the pasuk of Rizchi and Saru was referring to the in Mitzrayim. That although the other Shvatim were about bris milah, but Shevet Levi was not. That's the Rambam sheet. So if so, if the Medrash says that the whole reason Hafach Libon Lisna Leyamo, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned the love into hatred, is because they were Mavatal bris milah, and Shevet Levi was not Mavatal bris milah, so we understand why Shevet Levi wasn't Nishtabed. Very, very simple pshat. I want to point out something. That this question of being Mavatal bris milah in Mitzrayim is not simply a question of assimilation. You know, they are not circumcised, we are circumcised, that's a division, so let's be like them, we'll blend, and we'll also be Mavatal bris milah. Something which is much more consequential. When Yeshua was in Mao, the generation that was born in the Midbar, it says in the Pasuk, Yeshua says, I removed from you Cherpas Mitzrayim. Look in Yeshua, there in the Pasuk. It says, I removed from you the shame of Mitzrayim. In other words, being an Oriel, being uncircumcised, is not just, it happens to be that the Egyptians were uncircumcised. In other words, it is something which typifies Mitzrayim. It is associated with, it's almost a defining characteristic of Mitzrayim not to be circumcised, to the extent that the Orla is called Charpas Mitzrayim, the shame of Mitzrayim. That when the Jews were circumcised, Yeshua could say, I've now removed from you the Arla, which is the shame of Mitzrayim. So what does that mean? Why is the Arla called the shame of Mitzrayim? So Sifrei Chasidus, Rav Tzadok talks about this, and he says a very simple thing. The Rishonim, the Rambam, Moreh Nevuchim, others, say that what is the idea of Bris Milah? What is Bris Milah? What is the purpose? What is it meant to do? So they point out that, and whether this is considered, this is accepted by modern medical science, I don't know, but they say that Bris Milah has the effect that it weakens a person's desire or gratification, ultimately, which will also have the same effect in any case. And therefore, a person who is interested in sexual gratification will always opt not to have bris milah. The Mitzrayim, of course, we know was a nation. Chazal tell us there were shtutei zima. There was immorality in this area of life, in the area of arayas, was part and part of the culture of Mitzrayim. And therefore, to Mitzrayim, having bris milah was inconceivable. This Klal Yisrael is the exact opposite. Klal Yisrael, this is the area of excellence of Klal Yisrael. There's a heuris, there's caution in the area of arayas, and therefore Klal Yisrael practice bris milah. So when Klal Yisrael says Niyah K'Mitzrayim, let's be like the Egyptians and be Mavatal bris milah, it isn't just a question like changing styles of clothing or changing names or that type of thing. This is a defining characteristic. Mitzrayim is uncircumcised because this is what they value, and Klal Yisrael is circumcised because this is what it values. And when you step over the line, you say Niyah K'Mitzrayim, you are in a sense shedding something which is essential to your very, very nature. This is what Rav Tzadok says, and it's certainly true. But I'd like to propose that perhaps there's another aspect to this. Mitzrayim was a slave state. Certainly after Yosef got finished with it, the entire nation was enslaved to Paro. And it's mentioned in the Sforim that the very name Mitzrayim, Meitzar, means a constraint. It means a limit, a boundary, being fenced in. Right? Mina Meitzar Karasi Ka. I call unto Hashem from the straits. That's the idea of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is a nation where everyone is constrained. There's only one person who is free in Mitzrayim, and that's the Paro. The word Paro, the word Parua, means to be loose, to be unrestrained. So Paro is the only person who is unrestrained. Everyone else is in a meitzar. Everyone else is in a straitjacket, so to speak. It reminds me of a joke a person once told me. He was talking about a certain Chasidus, which I'll leave unnamed. And he mentioned to me that in this Chasidus, there are two madregas. There are two levels. There's the Rebbe, and there's everybody else. If you're not the Rebbe, you're a nobody. That may be true for every Chasidus. I don't know. But in Mitzrayim, it was really true that there were two levels. There was Paro and everybody else. It says if you're Paro, you're free. If you're not Paro, you're a slave. There's a Meitzar. Now it's very interesting that the religion of Mitzrayim, the one thing we know about the religion of Mitzrayim is that it was very, very much directed to the afterlife. Much attention was given to the preparation of bodies, the idea of mummies, the tombs, and so on and so forth. Of course, we archaeologists study the vast grand tombs of the pharaohs and so on and so forth. But this was common to the entire nation. Whereas everyone did it in a smaller way, and the pharaohs did it in a grander way. But the entire religion was geared to the afterlife. Now let's think about that for a second. Is there a relation to the idea of slavery and the belief in the afterlife? Of course there is. As we all know, the famous aphorism, it's really a misquote, of Karl Marx, who said that religion is the opiate of the masses. Right? Religion is the anesthetic of the people. So what does that mean? So Lenin explained the following, that religion suppresses revolution. In other words, communism in its theoretical sense is the revolution of the workers against the capitalists. So you want to have a spirit of dissatisfaction, of complaint, that we want to overthrow the status quo, and so on and so forth. Well, how did the capitalists suppress that? By introducing religion. Religion creates a certain passivity. It says, things are wretched now, that's the way they're supposed to be. This is, when will you get your reward? In the next world. So when you think in terms of the afterlife, okay, it's not the way I'd like it now, I'd prefer to have more to eat, I'd prefer to have more money, I'd prefer this, I'd prefer that, but I'll suffer in this world and I'll have bliss in the next world. So religion, by promoting a view which is directed towards the afterlife, really suppresses the yearning to make this world a better place. That's why it's the opiate. It's like an anesthetic. It drugs you up, right? It saps you of all desire and all drive to make things better here and now. The fact that you have a slave nation whose religion is geared to the idea of the afterlife makes a lot of sense. Because how do you suppress the natural yearnings of the people for freedom? By creating a state religion where everything is directed toward the next world. In this world, you're meant to suffer, right? You're not meant to work to make this a better place. It is what it is. You exist and you live within your matzar. You live within your constraint, within your straitjacket. Says, what's the purpose? In the next world. Then you'll enjoy and you'll eat and you'll drink and you'll feast. But here, this is the way it's meant to be. It's as wretched as it is, that is normal. That's the best you can hope for. So the religion really supports the regime, which of course we understand was always the case in the ancient societies, that the religion, the ideology, was to support the political interests of the powers that be. That's what Mitzrayim was all about. The one thing that we have to understand about Yiddishkeit, Torah, is that it's true we believe in Olam Haba, but we are not a belief system which accepts Olam Hazeh as is passively. It is a system which believes that this world is meant to be improved through chesed and through kindness and through diktuk and halacha and through the mechanics of the Jewish state. We can create an optimal society, a society of justice and a society of fairness and a society of contentment in this world. It's true, we'll also receive our reward in the next world. Right? But the Torah is not a system which is next worldly. It doesn't accept suffering, it doesn't accept poverty, it doesn't accept all the things you can get used to. It says, no, we have to strive to make this a better place. Despite the fact that there's also an Olam Haba, we also work to improve Olam Hazeh. What mitzvah symbolizes the idea that we are not constrained by the nature of the way things are is the mitzvah bris milah. Because the biggest constraint that we would assume is the constraints of teva, the constraints of nature. Whereas if the laws of nature dictate that things be a certain way, so that we certainly would say, well, we can't do anything about that, can't change the laws of nature. What does bris milah symbolize? Bris milah symbolizes the idea that no, that we can even improve on teva, even improve on nature. Right? A person is born, in a sense, defective. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, improve it, make it better. Practice bris milah. Therefore, bris milah is actually the antithesis of the value system in Mitzrayim. It isn't just a question of assimilation. This is their style, this is our style. Bris milah stands for everything that the Mitzrayim reject. The Mitzrayim reject the fact that this world can be improved. Only the power is free, but we are all in our straitjackets. We are all in our mitzarim. And the greatest Meitzer, of course, is the Meitzer of Teva. And therefore, Mitzrayim prepares for the afterlife. We have mummies and we have tombs, but we don't have Bris Milah. And Klal Yisrael doesn't prepare for the afterlife in that sense. We don't mummify bodies and we don't stack tombs. It says, yes, there's a schar in Olam Haba. But our efforts are directed to making this world a better place. That is symbolized by the mitzvah of Bris Milah. It says the rejection of Bris Milah, when we reject Bris Milah and say, Nia Kemitzrayim, it isn't just a question of embracing a foreign style. It is a rejection of something which is fundamental, the essence of what it means to be a Yid. And we have to understand that that's probably why Bris Milah is a precondition to Yetzias Mitzrayim. There had to be Bris Milah before Yetzias Mitzrayim. Chazal tell us that there were two mitzvahs with which Klal Yisrael was zeichet the Geula: Dam Milah and Dam Pesach. And L'doros, even to participate in the commemoration of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Bris Milah is a precondition. Whereas in oral, a person who's uncircumcised can't partake of the Korban Pesach. Not only that, but even a person who has not circumcised his children and his avodim, he hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah of Bris Milah completely, even though he himself is not an oro, also can't eat Korban Pesach. Whereas you have to fulfill the mitzvah of Bris Milah b'muluo entirely, including the circumcision of your children and your servants, and then you can eat Korban Pesach. Because until you embrace this vision of the world, you can't be an Eved of the Ribbon, you can't serve the Ribbon Shlomo. If you walk into the Beis HaMedrash with the Egyptian worldview, that we're in a meitzar, we are in a straitjacket, there's nothing we can do, all we hope to achieve is to feather our bed for the next world, there's nothing to talk about. You're not in the ballpark. Because you first have to have Bris Milah. After Bris Milah, then you welcome into the covenant of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that's the very close association of Bris Milah to Yetzias Mitzrayim and to Korban Pesach, which is the commemoration of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And I suspect that if we reflect for a moment on some of these concepts, we can understand a little bit of what is going on in Paro's mind in this parsha. And we mentioned a few moments ago that, as Lenin put it, religion is the opiate of the masses. It suppresses the desire for revolution and striving to improve this world. So the question you have to ask is this. I understand why the original socialists were against religion, because they really believed in what they were saying. That we want this revolution, the revolution of the workers, so we have to be rid of religion. But once communism showed its true colors, that it really was a dictatorship and the suppression of all independence and all liberty. So why didn't it bring religion back? Right? Why did it still rebel against religion? And the answer is because it made an amazing discovery that religion does not only function as the opiate of the masses. Religion, especially those religions who are the daughter religions of Judaism, can also be forces for revolution. In other words, it was a misunderstanding of what religion is all about. In other words, Marx and Lenin saw religion as being directed to the next world, creating passivity, disinterest, a willingness to accept suffering. And I think in some of the Eastern religions that's the case. In other words, Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, I think that may be in fact the case. But in those religions that borrowed from Judaism, to the contrary, So there's an idea of tikkun olam, making this world a better place. Fakir, to the contrary. Religion can be a force for revolution. And therefore, even when communism became a system of dictatorship, they did not reintroduce religion to suppress revolution, because by that time they understood that, to the contrary, religion can be a force for revolution. And as we know, if we study history, what was the force behind the revolution in Poland, for example, right, to overthrow communism? It was the Catholic Church. Religion was the force for dissatisfaction, for wanting to change, to bring justice into the world. And of course that is because the Catholic Church borrowed so liberally from Judaism and was mechadesh, a whole new gather of religion, that religion is not like the religion of ancient Mitzrayim, which creates passivity and resignation to the status quo and thinks only in terms of the next world. But to the contrary, it's a religion which demands and insists on change in the here and now. Paro thought that religion would be good for the Hebrews. In the same way that religion in Mitzrayim was a force for suppression of all revolution, it was a force for creating passivity and creating indifference. He thought it would be a good thing. And therefore the Ramban says it was a davar pashut, that every nation has to have its religious leaders and teachers. He says that'll be a very good thing. That will accomplish our ends. So therefore the Ramban says that Paro was very, very supportive. And since in Klal Yisrael it was Levy who were the leaders, then by all means we have to have religious people, we have to have teachers and rabbis, and they have to go and preach the Jewish religion, and that will dovetail perfectly with the interests of the regime in enslaving the Jews. But it's interesting that Paro himself discovers that he makes a very big mistake, because the truth was there was another religious concession that Paro also made. According to Chazal, that Paro gave the Jews Shabbos. And it's a very, very interesting thing. It says when Moshe Rabbeinu went out, Vayar b'siv loisom, so the Medrash Rabbah says that he came to Paro, and he said, listen, he says, you're going to work them 7 days a week. He says, they're going to die. Got to give them a day of rest. So Paro said, oh, very good idea. So what day should we give them? So Moshe Rabbeinu said, give them a Shabbos. Now, so the Abu Jam says that when we say on Shabbos, Yismach Moshe matnas chelko, that Moshe Rabbeinu rejoices in his portion, that's a reference to Shabbos. Because Moshe Rabbeinu brought Shabbos to the Jewish people the first time. Even before the Yetzias Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu brought Shabbos to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. And Paro was all for it. But what happened? It's an amazing, amazing thing. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes and says, listen, let the Jews go, and so on and so forth, so first Paro speaks to Moshe. Lama Moshe v'Aaron tafriyo some of the Why are Moshe and Aaron disturbing the people? But then Paro now addresses the Jewish people. And he says, there are a lot of people. And you would want them to stop working? So Paro tightens the screws, and he says, no more straw, and they have to work harder. They are lazy. That's why they cry out, we want to bring korbanos to Hashem. Let the work become heavier, let them do it, and let them not direct themselves to false words. So what is this a reference to? Al Yishu b'divrei shaker. So the Medrash Rabbah says an amazing thing. The Medrash Rabbah says that Paro discovered that the Jews had Megillas. The Jews had scrolls which they were mishtashea, which they delighted with, mishabbos l'shabbos. The whole week they had no time to learn, they were busy working. So but Shabbos, the day off, they would read these Megillas, read these scrolls. What were these scrolls? These were scrolls of religious teaching. Right? And Paro came to understand that these scrolls of religious teaching were not serving the regime, they were creating rebellion against the regime. They would be mishtashea with these scrolls, and this whetted their appetite for freedom, to bring korbanos, to serve the Ribono Shel Olam, to live not within the mitzarim, within the straitjacket of Mitzrayim. So when Paro said, Al Yishu b'divrei shakeh, the Medrash understands it to mean they should not be mishtashea, they should not delight in the false words of these Megillas, and Paro then took away the Shabbos from the Jews. That's what the Medrash says. Paro made them work on Shabbos and took away the Megillas. It was Mi'ikara Ma'ikasavar L'Psayf Ma'ikasavar. What did he think in the beginning? What did he think in the end? He thought in the beginning religion is a very good thing. You want to enslave a people, give them religion. It's the best thing. By the way, this is something that you may know, may not know, that the black church in the southern states was very, very active and very, very encouraged by the white slave owners, right, in the period before the Civil War, because they believed the same thing, that giving them religion would relax them and calm them down, make them more accepting of their lot, and so on and so forth, holding out the promise of eternal bliss in the next world. It was a very, very good thing. It was a very, very good thing. So as Paro understood, it was a big mistake. He made a big mistake, because religion, at least of the Jewish variety, does not create passivity, right? It creates determination to make the world better. And they were mishtashea, they delighted in these Megillas, because these Megillas held out the promise of redemption and Geula, and therefore Paro understood at all costs it had to change. And therefore, in order to maintain his stranglehold, he had to take away the Megillas and take away the Shabbos, and he said, like Yishu b'divrei shakeh. But at least the Havamim, as the Ramban says, we don't understand. Why did the Ramban let them have the Leviim in order to be their teachers? Because the Ramban, Paro thought religion is a good thing. You want to enslave a people? The best thing is to give them religion. Right? Paro discovered at his own peril that it's not that way. That Judaism is not that type of religion. It's not a religion which says accept things as they are and Bezos Hashem and Olam Haba will be better. To the contrary, it's a religion which says that we have to masaken the world as it is. The mitzvah that symbolizes that is bris milah. And therefore, Klal Yisrael embraces bris milah, Mitzrayim rejects bris milah. When Klal Yisrael says Niyah K'Mitzrayim, right, that is when Mitzrayim has power over them. Now, you can't enslave a person unless he's willing to be enslaved. Now, as long as Klal Yisrael was double in the mitzvah of bris milah, as long as they understood that we have the power to masaken the olam, they could not be enslaved. When they said Niyah K'Mitzrayim and they rejected bris milah, only then could the enslavement begin. That's what Chazal are teaching us, and I think this is a lesson that we have to know. Sometimes we too can fall into this trap of passivity. And we think that Bezos Hashem is vetan good when Mashiach comes, or maybe in the next world, and so on and so forth. That's certainly not the ideal which the Torah holds out. The Torah says we have to work to make this world a better place. We have to ensure that justice is done. We have to assure that everyone's needs are addressed, that the communal problems are solved, and to approach life with a sense of resignation that everything is fine. It's good in the far, far future. That is something which is totally contrary to our belief. I just want to make an announcement that Ezras Hashem, we're going to be changing the day of this year from Sunday night next week to Tuesday night. Not just for next week, from this point onward, Ezras Hashem. Hopefully it will enable more people to come and provide other advantages.